Welcome back to another quick Python tutorial. Today we are going to discuss validation of input and how to set up our validation loops so that we can be sure that the information gathered through our program is appropriate for our program to execute correctly. So we don't want to spend a ton of time with error messages and having the user deal with those types of things. So what we will do is make sure that the input that they do put into the program is appropriate for the program, and we can then use it appropriately. So I've set up three functions here: validate odd, validate name, and validate email. Just to show you different aspects of how you can set these loops up and different tips and tricks that you can use within Python itself to kind of help you with the situation. So validate odd is going to just validate that we enter in an odd number. If we were to enter in an even number, it's going to continue asking us until we enter in an odd number. Validate name is going to make sure that we enter in two words, essentially. So something where there's a name, a space, and another name, we want to make sure that there is one space and only one space, and that, yeah, that's about it. One space and only one space. For validate email, we want to make sure that we validate the email on two different criteria. One, that it contains an @ symbol, and two, that the top level domain ends with .com or .net. Obviously, we could put in some other things there, and I'll show you some tips and tricks as to how we can work with an expanded set of TLDs, but yeah, we'll get to that in due time. So first, let's start with validate odd. So I'm going to get rid of the pass instruction. The reason I have that there is just to give the function something to pass over so that my code can run when I don't have definition in for the rest of the functions. So for this function, I simply want to be able to input a number, see that it's odd, and keep asking until it becomes odd. That's the whole point of a validation loop, is that you do not let the program continue until the user enters in appropriate information. So first I'm going to let the user enter in some sort of a number. We'll go int input, and we'll be specific with our prompt: enter an odd number. Okay. And then here we want to keep asking them that until they get it correct, until they actually enter an odd number. And so this is where the validation loop kind of comes in. A loop is going to start with the word while because it's conditional repetition. We don't know how long this will run, or even if this loop will run at all. Maybe the user enters an odd number to begin with. But we want to continue to run this loop while the user has not entered an odd number, and something that's not an odd number must be an even number. So let's do something like this: num mod 2 equals 0. If I divide it by 2 and I get no remainder, well, then it must have been divisible by 2, which by definition is an even number. So essentially, once this loop is entered, we want to basically do this again. Okay, that's the whole point of validation, is that we keep asking the question until we get it right. Once we do get it right, this will obviously become false, which means we have entered an odd number, and then we can just print out that thank you for entering some odd number. So we'll do something like this. We'll type in, let's see, num and is an odd number. And if you're unfamiliar with the print statement I have here, it's called a printf statement. You put the prefix f in front of your string, and then inside your string you can put curly braces and enter in the variable name that you would like to appear in its place. So it's kind of like a placeholder here. So it's kind of the newest iteration of the print statement instead of doing the .format method, which I think still has its place. And you'll see that a little bit later, but this is just a nice little way to do that. So down here in the main method, I have the function call for validate odd, and I'm running the main. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. I've already got it saved, so I just need to overwrite it. And it says enter an odd number. Let's say enter a 2, not an odd number. Enter a 6, not an odd number. Enter a 10, not an odd number, but enter a 3, and it ends, and I have an odd number. So it kept asking me. It was going to continue to ask me infinitely many times, at least until I entered an odd number. So that's the whole point of a validation loop, is the fact that we keep on you about the input until we get what's appropriate. All right? Let's get to the validate name. It's a little bit more complex of a validation structure. So first and foremost, when we're dealing with strings, I like to always have the string documentation up so that I can find methods and functions that are going to help me with this. So for validate name, we want to make sure the user enters two names separated by a single space. Now I don't know what the criteria for a name per se is, but I do know that it's two words and it has to be separated by a single space. So really this is the key contents here. Separated by a single space. So we want to make sure that there's one and only one space in this, okay? And that it exists, essentially. So, you know what, I look over here and I see this method called find, and that could help me identify, one, where a space is located, and two, if the space exists. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to come up and figure out where that first space is, if it exists. So space equals name.find, okay, and I am looking for a single space. Now, think over here, string.find requires an S, a string to come in. It returns the lowest index in S, where the substring sub is found, okay? So, such that sub is wholly contained in blah, 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 blah. If it doesn't find it, returns a -1 on failure, okay? So that's kind of important that we notice that that works in that way. So, s.find, okay, or name.find allows me to enter in a space and it'll identify it. If you're not sure what that does, we can easily just print out the space real quick and just see how it works. So let's go and turn this one off. And this is just for validation purposes to see what's happening, because it's a function we probably haven't used yet. And let's say I type in a word like hello everyone. Right? And it's going to return 5 because that's where the space is. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's the index of the first space at index 5. So obviously not something we need in our program, but it's nice to know that we have the space and it's at a specific index. Now, let's think about what else we need to do. Well, we want it separated by a single space. So there's the opportunity for more than one, correct? So let's see if we can find another space. So I'll go next space equals name.find, okay? And I'm looking for a space, but I can start looking at space plus 1. So there's another argument that you can type in here, and it can tell you where to begin looking. I would like to begin looking in the location after where I found the first space. Okay? So that's what that's doing. Now, it very well may not find one, which means next space would return a -1 if that was the case. That's what the function is telling us it can do. So let's get into our loop. Okay, now I'm passing in a name by parameter here. So I want to see that these two locations, if they did exist, are not the same. Okay, if they are the same, okay, then I want to keep doing this piece. So I want to start my loop and I want to say while my space is, say, not equal to -1, because that tells me that it exists, okay? Or I'm sorry, while my space is equal to -1, because that tells me it doesn't exist. So this would be a condition where I want to keep looping because a space doesn't exist. Or while next space is not equal to -1, because that tells me also that next space exists. So essentially what I have here is I've got this loop set up to say, okay, while I don't have a space, or while I have one space, but also I have a second space. That's kind of the tricky part. I want to make sure I have one single space. So this eliminates the fact that I wouldn't have any spaces. And this eliminates the fact that I have more than one, so a possible second space. And while those two things are true, okay, I want to continue asking for a name. So I want to go name equals input. Please enter a name separated by a single space. Okay. And I need to do these two lines of code over again. So I need to identify where the space is and where the next space potentially could be in the loop, because that's what my condition is based on. Okay, if I don't re-evaluate what those two variables are, my condition doesn't get updated. I get stuck in an infinite loop, and that's not something I want to deal with. So I need them to enter a name, and then I need to identify where the first space is, if it exists, identify the next space where it is and if it exists. And as long as this space exists somewhere and this space does not, okay, then I keep going on this, okay? So here we go. Let's enter in a print statement to make sure we exit the loop, and we could say something like thank you, and then I'll put the curly braces, dot format, and you know what, I'll let them type in or print out their first name, and we'll go name, bracket, from the start to space. So there's a nice way to use slicing, okay? Let's see validate name and see that it works. Unmatched parenthesis here. Oh, I've got 2, don't need 2. So let's enter a name like John Smith. Thank you, John. Let's try it again. Let's see that it works when we don't have it correctly. John Smith, no space. Oh, I need to enter it. John Smith. Okay, so that works. Let's enter more than 2 names. John Albert Smith. Oh, it didn't allow me to do it. And so here, now I type in John Smith and it says thank you, John. So now I've got the ability where it works appropriately. I know that I have to enter in 1 space, it works. If I don't enter in space, it makes me ask the question again. If I enter in more than 1 space, it makes me ask the question again. So it's something that kind of helps us out and it validates that input for us very, very easily. All right. Let's get into the validate email, okay? So this one's kind of, I'm gonna have some new tips in here. So the validate email, we wanna be able to input an email, make sure our top level domain is a .com or a .net, and that it contains the @ symbol, okay? So let's first get the email. We need something to work with. Equals input, enter your email address. Okay. Now, while my email.find at an ampersand or @ symbol, if that's equal to -1, because remember that find method will return -1 if it can't find something, then I want to enter it again. So if this comes out to -1, that means it didn't exist, which means we want to enter it again. Or if I don't have one of those top level domains, my email, and I want to identify those last 4 characters. So this is a nice place where we can use negative indexing. So if I go -4 to the end, and it's not a .com or a .net. Now we could do this a couple ways. We could say that's not equal to a .com or not equal to a .net. But I'm actually do something a little bit interesting here that Python allows us to do. I'm going to create something called a tuple, okay, which is a sequence. We've talked about sequences before, called top-level domains, and I'm going to wrap them in parentheses, and I'll put .com in there. I'll put .net in there, and I can actually put in a bunch of different stuff. .edu, .org, so on and so forth. So I could say, or my email, last 4 digits of my email, not in. Not simply means it's not part of the set, and in meaning it's not in the set or sequence, my top level domain. So this is where Python really kind of shine and starts thinking a little bit more in long English. Okay, here we want to get a new email address. Okay. And then we can finally print some thank you message. And now we can run this and see that it works appropriately. So let's take a look. We'll validate email, run it. Let's see that we can run it, and we'll type in hello@something.com. That's working just fine, so we know it's working. It's always nice to make sure that what you want to work with is working. So let's try hello.com. So we're obviously missing the @ symbol. Okay, so enter your email address. Let's go hello@something. Okay, so obviously we're missing the .com. Let's go hello@something.edu. Right? Still not right because it's not .com or .net, but we can go hello@something.net, and it seems to work just fine. Now the nice thing about this is it's easily scalable, so if I wanted to put in more, I can go with a .edu, okay, or a .org. And now I could run this and it actually works really, really well with also those top level domains. And there we go. So the not in operator, the in operator just simply returns true if something is a member of a sequence. By saying not in, it simply returns true if it's not a member of a given sequence. The sequence is the TLD, the top level domains, and the email substring is what we're searching for to be in the top level domains. And as long as it's not in it, it returns true, and we want to get another email address. So it kind of works out really, really well, and Python gives us the ability to kind of run through that. So that's kind of the skinny on validating information, validating inputs, whether that input is numbered or whether it's text-based. You have all sorts of tools at your disposal to try to figure out what the validation process is going to look like. But no matter what you're validating and how you're validating it, it's going to be in a loop, in the context of a loop, a while loop, some sort of conditional loop structure. And you're going to want to make sure that you do not let them out of the loop until they do what's being asked. That's the important part, so that the way the rest of your program can proceed without bad information in. Because we have a little saying in programming, garbage in equals garbage out. So keep that in mind and make sure your input is appropriate. Lots of different techniques, but they all come down to this idea of looping until you get what you want. All right, so hopefully that helps with some input validation. You've learned some new skills here, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.